So the Doughnut Economics movement began, I believe, in 2017 with the publication of Kate Raworth's book by that title. And that was only 6 years ago. It was totally a renegade economic movement. If anyone qualifies as an economic outsider, it would be Kate Raworth. And it has such energy that 6 years later, it is a real force to be reckoned with, and really is spread in some ways around the world, with whole cities declaring themselves Doughnut economic cities, such as the city of Amsterdam. And so that's amazing. That's something we really want to understand. And then something like that can never be attributed to an individual. It must be attributed to an organization. And that organization is the Doughnut Economics Action Lab, and it was co-founded by Kate and our speaker, Carlota Sanz Ruiz. And so we have the other half of the Doughnut Economics movement here. And so it's going to be so great to hear from you, Carlota, and to have a chance to talk about the this movement, how a very tiny organization brought it about, and what could be done to catalyze it even further. And with all of our meetings, all of our seminars, we hope to explore collaborative potential. And I'll end up by saying that the relationship between ProSocial World and the Doughnut Economics Action Lab has a history, stretches back to the beginning of the pandemic, when Deal hosted a team that for our project, it was the first time we employed this 4-level team of team approach, and Deal was part of that team. And so ever since, we've been certainly aware of each other, but not working closely with each other at the moment. And so maybe that will change. I don't know. But in any case, Carlota, please take it away from here.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks so much, David. And thanks so much for this beautiful invitation, because it is true, actually, our story comes for a long time. In fact, I was actually remembering that time. It was a very different world pre-COVID. We had just actually launched the organization. We were a very, very small team, actually working still in a co-working space, which doesn't exist anymore. So, and we did that ProSocial training, which still resonates within the team, and we still use it, and we still come back to those ProSocial canvases and concepts that we explored. So thank you so much for having me today. We've got an hour and a half, which is quite plenty of time to really, I'll be sharing, and then we can have some conversation. And so firstly, I'm gonna just share my screen, because yeah, that's kind of always first thing to do. So are you seeing now the yellow screen?
Yes, we are.
Yes. Okay, cool. So yeah, just to very briefly introduce myself. So I am Carlota Sanz, and I'm co-founder of Doughnut Economics Action Lab. And as David said, for the past 4 years, we've been really exploring how to turn the ideas of Doughnut Economics into practice, so that we can create economies that are regenerative and distributive by design. And so for the past 4 years, since we launched the lab, I've been really immersed in imagining, designing, bringing to life what I think is a very much emergent strategy at Deal. So it's been an incredible journey of exploring what it means to turn a radical idea like Doughnut Economics into action, and so that it spreads, right? And so I'm gonna be running you a bit through this journey. So I'm gonna go a bit from the concepts to practice, and to some of our internal own strategy of how we're aiming to do this. And I want to start firstly just by sharing why we think that the 20th century economics is out of date. So I also define myself as a renegade economist, and I'm sure that many or some of you might as well. And I like to think about this through pictures, because as always, Kate has always said as well, there's so much power in pictures, right? There's so much that pictures can really shape how we see and how we understand the world. So when we think of economics and when we still ask economic students worldwide, what is the first image they remember learning in economics? And that's for sure the first image I learned in economics a while ago. The answer continues to be always the same. And so this is the picture of supply and demand. And we've always thought that that was a very extraordinary place to start, because it's like instantly putting the market at the very center of the vision and putting the price at the only metric of concern, and it leaves outside everything else. So everything else that is not within that price market, it's understood like an externality. And so we're finding ourselves in the absurd situation in the 21st century where we are talking about the living world as an environmental externality. And I think that should have been ringing alarms for a long time ago already. This framing is out of times. But also, if we think of the selfie of humanity, so who we are, and all too often, we still show up in so many models in mainstream economics as that rational economic man. And it's never really drawn, but I think it would look like a bit like this. So it would probably be a man standing alone with no dependence, with money in his hand, ego in his heart, and a calculator in his head. And for sure, nature at his feet. And the real danger that we've seen with these selfies, that the more students actually learn from him, the more they admire and try to mimic those traits. And there's a lot of research already showing how economic students say they value competition and self-interest over collaboration as they go from one year to the other in their studies. So who we tell ourselves we are certainly shapes who we become. And finally, the goal. So what's the goal of economics? And the goal is so deeply rooted that it's never really drawn. And it's still invoked in every textbook, in every speech of politicians. And we continue to see how endless growth of GDP is that goal that it's, sitting behind all of the economic mindset that we've inherited. And that is, again, a very bizarre goal for me, because it's like, if we think of how rich economies are at now, so we've got economies that are far richer than they've ever been in the past, and they're still thinking that more success lies on more GDP growth, regardless of whether that is resulting in a thriving people or planet. So a lot of that mindset, I believe, has brought us to where we are today. And I don't think I need to reiterate probably in this audience how much of a century of crisis we live in, right? So the 21st century has started with repeated crises, from financial meltdown 2008 that impacted everyone. We live in the era of climate collapse. We've experienced the crisis of the pandemic. And what we see is how these crises are showing us how deeply interconnected we are with each other and the rest of the living planets. But they are also showing us how a lot of those crises are really arising from a lot of that mindset that we have inherited and a lot of the economic systems that we have created. And so, of course, we need a new vision. We need a new vision for the 21st century. And that's precisely what the Doughnut brings. And so for those who are not very familiar with the concept, the Doughnut offers a new vision for human prosperity in the 21st century. And it's aiming to leave no one falling short of the essentials of life in the middle. So no one should be shorting short of water, food, health, education. And we always say that this social foundation has been crowdsourced from the world's governments, from the Sustainable Development Goals, which means that every government in the world has agreed that every person has a claim in meeting these essential needs. So leave no one falling short, but at the same time, do not overshoot the ecological ceiling. And this ecological ceiling it's made out of 9 planetary boundaries, which are Earth's life-supporting systems. And these systems are keeping our balanced planet a sweet home for humanity and every species here with us. So the donut is really saying, well, let's aim to meet everyone's needs, but within the means of the living planet, so that we can live inside that safe and just space for humanity that is represented with that donut shape, which I think that also it's the shape and it's the playfulness of that concept that it's really having traction, right? How much an image can show. So this is our new image. This is our new goal. This new balance between peoples and planet thriving. And if that's the new goal, the truth is that we're very far from reaching it now, and we know this. All the red of this image is showing the extent to which people are falling short of the essentials of life, and the extent to which humanity is in overshoot of the planetary boundaries. So the challenge that we know we've got in the 21st century is to eliminate all the red that we're seeing in this picture, and to come into the donut from both sides, from the social foundation and from the ecological ceiling. And we are the first generation to see this picture holistically and to realize that we certainly need new solutions if we want to tackle these problems, because last century economic theories, conventional business models, or even traditional development policies were just simply not designed to address those challenges. So where do we start, and how we move to that space? And we always believe that we need to start economics again, and not with that picture of the supply and demand, but with a very different diagram, with a very different picture in mind. And this is the embedded economy. And it's showing us that the economy is a subset of society. So it is ultimately a social construct, and it's formed of social relationships. And it's also embedded in cultural, legal, political institutions. And of course, society, in turn, is embedded within the living world. And we constantly draw on from materials and matter, and we're putting waste and pollution, and we're depending on solar energy. So this is, for me, a much more sensible starting point if we want to speak about economy and about managing our planetary home. But also, if we look at the economy itself, well, we see that mainstream economics starts economics, as I was saying, with that supply and demand and that focus in the market. However, in relation to the market, we can only appear as consumers or as producers. We're either shopping or working. With respect to production, we're either being treated as labor or as capital. And so we mainly show up constantly, as I was saying, as this rational economic man. However, we're far more than this market player, right? In relation to the state, we may be public servants, we might be teachers, health workers, residents, voters, protesters. These are all crucial roles that we play in relation to the state, for instance. And it's really interesting to see at, these two, the market, the state, they became certainly in the 20th century some kind of an ideological match. We either had free markets or socialist economies. And I always think that this ideological fight somehow was so consumed that it really made us lose sight of other two fundamental forms of provisioning, which are essential for for our well-being and our thriving as human beings. The first one is the household, where we all begin every day. So we can be parents, relatives, children. This is the space of unpaid caring labor, traditionally done by women. So cooking, cleaning, whipping, getting the children ready for school, looking after the sick, doing it over again every day. But also the commons. So people meet together, not through the market, not through the state, but as a community. And we often co-create goods and services that we value, often without changing money even. And here we might be volunteers, sharers, co-creators, stewardships. And if we think of traditional economics, well, we see that we're completely missing the value creating in these other spaces of the household and the commons. And it's also really interesting to see this framework through the lens of what happened at COVID, right? So when the markets closed, then we suddenly saw how important were the other roles, because of course, there was a huge recognition of all the role of key workers, public key state workers that were keeping society going, but also the wage that had gone to the household, whether it was looking after the sick or homeschooling the children. And again, I believe there was a big rediscovery in many communities of what was the value of the commons. And a lot of people really step up into looking our neighbors and the most vulnerable communities. And so a lot of people, I believe, really got a sense of how important it is to remind ourselves that we are part of a community. We are social beings where we have that sense of a we, which is very in contrast with that rational economic man that economics brings over and over again until now. So we need to create economies that enable us to thrive in all these roles and recognize all these ways that we can create value. But also, and this is fundamental for us at Doughnut Economics, we believe that we need to transform fundamentally the dynamics of our economies, because we need to create economies that are distributive by design and regenerative by design. And I'm going to pause in these two concepts because they really sit at the heart of what we're trying to bring about at DEAL. We have inherited an industrial system that is taking Earth's materials. With them, we're making stuff, we're using them for a while, and then we're throwing them away. And this linear take, make, use, lose dynamic that we constantly have is precisely what is pushing us out of planetary boundaries. So we already know that we can change this and that we can turn it into a cyclical regenerative cycle where we are using resources far more carefully, far more creatively, far more collectively. So we need to move from a degenerative dynamic in our economies to regenerative. And what does that look like? Well, I brought some pictures to illustrate, because we really need to leave behind that constant landscape degradation that we have we continuously bring about through our industrial systems, and we need to instead really restore and regenerate nature. And of course, we also need to leave behind these models that we continue to pursue, where we're dumping waste in the neighborhoods of the world's poorest people. We need to reuse, we need to repair, we need to share, connect, and really create the conditions for a more circular, cyclical industrial economy. And of course, we've never done this before. We're really starting to learn and get a sense of what would it take to leave behind that degenerative dynamic and move to a regenerative mindset. But that's one dynamic. The next one, of course, we also have to recognize that 20th century economies have been designed in many ways through technology, through law, through enterprise, in ways that tend to concentrate value in hands of a few. And I think that that's why we've also seen, of course, we continue to see the rise of the 1%. And we also know that we should be moving away from this mindset. And we need to be co-creating economies that shares value far more equitably and far more fairly with all those who co-create it. And again, I brought some examples just to illustrate. And of course, we can look at these dynamics from so many angles. So this is just a way of illustrate. For instance, if we think of housing, and if we think of how housing has been treated throughout decades, right? It continues to be unaffordable for the many. A lot of it is owned by investors who see it just as a great investment. And it's pretty much treated like an investment asset, right? And of course, we know that housing, it's firstly a human right. And so it's interesting to see how other models and other ways of understanding housing can result in very different models. So for instance, Vienna, over 60% of Vienna's residents are living in social housing, which is owned either by the city municipality or subsidized by cooperatives. And this is really allowing for affordable rent. It's central, it's good quality. So completely different outcome of what housing is in a place because of the decisions that a city has made of what housing really stands there, and therefore how it's owned and how it's managed and how it's distributed. And business, I think, is another interesting angle to see it. We have inherited a mindset from last century where the purpose of business is business. and that's it. And of course, we know that business could be designed for so many other purposes, right? It could really play a valuable role in generating also social and ecological and community benefits. So how could we be designing businesses in a way that we're distributing wealth and power in a much more equitable way? So from degenerative to regenerative, from divisive to distributive. And I've just run very briefly through some of the core concepts that lie at the very heart of Doughnut Economics. And as David said, these ideas were all described by Kate Raworth, my dear colleague, in her book, Doughnut Economics, 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist. And since the book was launched in 2017, these ideas just did bang. They really had a lot of traction. It was, I think it's been really fascinating to see how much resonance they had internationally, but also how much change makers were just starting or were willing to start putting them into practice so spontaneously, so playfully, so creatively. And so in 2019, that's where, I met Kate as part of my own journey. My background is, as I said, I am a trained economist. I actually started working in the business world, and at very early in my career, I actually really was very clear and convinced that we had to redesign, right? Because what we had was not fit for purpose. So my own journey of really getting immersed in these ideas and in new economic practice took me to meet Kate. And when I met her in 2019, it was very clear that these ideas were really ready to jump off the page. And so it was the energy of the practitioners that really, I think, pushed firstly Kate and certainly inspired me to really say, okay, let's co-found an organization that brings these ideas into action. And so we founded Doughnut Economics Action Lab. And we always say that our name is very intentional, and it was from the very beginning. It was always about bringing ideas into action, and it's always in a very experimental spirit. So we really believe that we are learning with and from others through experiments. What would it take to co-create a new economy? And that's really the spirit in which we launched Doughnut Economics Action Lab, to really work with changemakers worldwide who wanted to turn these ideas into action. And our focus was to really bring about or co-create accessible, irresistible tools and share them in the knowledge, in the commons, and connect practitioners and amplify our collective practice and learning so that these ideas could spread wide and far. So I'm going to move now actually into from the concepts into the practice, and a deal. Since we launched, we kind of identified some of the key areas of practice that had a lot of energy and that really wanted to engage with Doughnut Economics. And so our organization, it's kind of almost, we try to cut the pie across 6 different themes. And of course, these are all related and these are all connected, and we work very in collaboration. But yeah, we have 6 themes. We work with schools and teachers and students that want to bring these ideas into the classrooms. We're starting to work with businesses that are, courageous enough to really look at what would it take to enable regenerative and distributive outcomes. Researchers, academics that want to really bring these ideas in academia, but also the household, the communities, the neighborhood level. We're working with all those grassroots communities that really want to bring these ideas to help reshape their visions of the places they live. And we're also working with governments at a city and regional level, but also starting more and more to engage with national governments that are reaching out to explore and bring these ideas into their own transformational processes. And underpinning these themes, we've got, I think, what is the heart of DEAL, which is this online community platform. So we launched very early, on the very early days in 2020, what we launched was this space, which is a community platform. It's a space for really bring together the emergent community of practitioners to really get them connected so that they can learn from each other and inspire each other. And so here's where we're bringing all of the open access tools to equip those that want to bring these ideas into their place. But also we're really eager to share stories in these platforms, stories of how pioneers are doing it, because each place is of course taking this in different ways, and we really believe that sharing those stories can amplify and can inspire and trigger more action. So as I say, a lot of what we do is really to bring these tools to the commons and to innovate with the original concepts so that they can be applied in the different thematic areas that we're working. And so I'm going to briefly share with you two of our main, I would say, frameworks and tools that we have launched and that changemakers all over the world are applying and are using when they're engaging with doughnut economics in practice, in the ground, in their places. The first one, and this is where we started. So when I first met Kate, actually, there was energy everywhere, but where there was certainly energy was at the level of cities. You know, a lot of cities and really reaching out to us, well, what would it mean to bring the concept of the doughnut, which is a global concept, to a place, to a specific place? And so a lot of the work that we did in the first couple of years was to really co-create a framework that allowed us to localize that doughnut to a specific place. And we've started applying it in many cities, but it's a framework that has been now adapted and it's being applied at different scales, from towns to regions to neighborhoods, even to nations. Now we're really starting to explore it. So I'm going to take you through it. And so the starting question that we have is, well, can we live in the doughnuts? You know, how can our city help bring humanity into that doughnut? And so we can unroll the doughnuts and we can create a space where we begin to envision the future that we want to bring. And so we can enter that space between the social foundation and the ecological ceiling and start to think, what would it mean to thrive here in our city and our relationship with the rest of the living world? And so it's a space that we've created to start imagining and recognizing new possibilities for the places we live in. And in the heart of this framework, there's a question that we're asking every city, every place that it's reaching out with us. We're inviting them to ask themselves this question. And so I'm going to invite you also to think about it from, you know, the point, the place where you live, even if it's a city or a town or even a whole region or a country. And it says, how can our city become a home to thriving people in a thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of all the planet? And it's quite an ambitious question, and there's a lot there. So we split it in 4 when we look at it, and we start by asking ourselves, how can all the people in our city thrive? How can we ensure that all of our residents are healthy, are connected, are enabled, are empowered? And of course, these are questions for the people of this place, and they can only be answered of the people in that place. So it's a space that provides an opportunity for a collective conversation about what it means to have a decent life here. The second question that we bring is, well, how can this city, how can we put this city in the natural context? How can our city thrive within its natural habitat? Which biome is it part of? What is nature's genius here where we are? What is doing nature here? How is it sequestering carbon? How is nature storing groundwater? How is housing biodiversity? How is cooling the climate? How it's really housing that biodiversity, just like the wetland next door is doing. So what would it mean to design our cities in a way that they're behaving as generous as the wetland next door? So this is a very ambitious question that we're bringing to cities that want to engage to doughnut economics. And these 2 questions are setting our local aspirations to be thriving people in a thriving place. But of course, every city and every town in the planet is drawing from resources from elsewhere. So we need to set that local aspiration in the context of a global responsibility and ask ourselves, well, how can our city respect the health of the whole planet? Where is the timber coming from? Where is the food, the water resources coming from? Where are the carbon emissions being emitted around the world in the name of our city prosperity? And not only the ecological impact of the way we live and the way we consume in our city, but what is the impact in the people in the planet, right? How our city can respect the well-being of all people, who has stitched and sewed the clothes that we are wearing, who has picked and packed the food that we buy, who's dug and transported the minerals that are building our homes, our buildings, and how can their rights also be respected and those of the communities in which we live. So these four lenses make up what we're calling, or what we call a deal, the city portrait, and they have been at the very core and starting point of every city and place that has started to engage with these ideas. And it's been fascinating. So since 2020, it's been really thrilling to see how many cities, towns, regions have started to play and really put these concepts into practice and innovating with them and adapting them to their own local context. And these four lenses have been the starting point of a lot of these conversations. And not only city governments or regional governments, but also community-led. So it's been also fascinating to see how much energy there was, at a grassroots level, people in a place self-organizing and bringing these ideas to help them trigger different transformational journeys within the places they lived. And this is a snapshot, I'd say, of how we're bringing these ideas to places. And I thought it would also be very interesting to share a bit of what we're doing or what we've been doing with businesses. So what happens when businesses meets the donut? How do businesses respond to the challenge of the donut that it brings? Because as I said, we are also starting to work with businesses, and it's been a long journey really to figure out how to engage with the world, with business, with this big challenge, right, that we're bringing out with the donut. So for the past year, we've been working closely with different companies, with different members of the deal community to create the core tools and frameworks that are consistent, we believe, with the transformative ambition that the donut offers. And we've just very recently published a tool for everyone that wants to explore what Doughnut Economics means for business. And so I'm going to very briefly share some of the core ideas that sit behind this tool, because of course, the starting point is, well, how can businesses aim to do the donut? Can they aim to do the donut? And we believe that, yeah, they of course can, and they should. And if businesses want to help tackle the ecological and social degradation, then we need to leave behind that 20th century extractive enterprise mindset, which is linear and divisive by design. And we need to create businesses that are regenerative and distributive by design. And I've explained these concepts very broadly at the beginning. And what I'm going to do now is very briefly illustrate them with some of the very inspiring examples that we're seeing coming from the business community that are really rising to the challenge of coming up with solutions that will enable us to come inside the donut. So firstly, we have to generate regenerative practices through business. So what would it mean to design businesses that work with and within the cycles of the living world? So we've got from Fairphone, for instance. It's an open modular phone. It's a company that basically sells open modular design phones. And what is interesting about them is it's not only that it has a core product which is designed to work against the industry norm of build of obsolescence, but also the way they are designing themselves. So they were always starting as a campaign to really campaign against the damaging mobile industry. And it was never really having, a shareholder-owned company mindset. It was never there to really deliver returns. What it was there to do was to really create a completely disruptive product that could shake the industry, right? And what is interesting to see is how they've approached also the way they've grown and the way they are bringing investment, because they are not leaning to an exponential growth to maximize capital, but they are really keeping it so that they can keep at its core the purpose of the business, which is indeed creating a completely different way of understanding a phone. Interface carpets, we've been actually in contact with them for a while. Again, none of these examples are perfect at all. What we try is to illustrate some of the practices that we're seeing in interface. For instance, what they did was from very early on, they said, well, we're going to become net zero, and we want to be 100% renewable energy by 2020. And we want to run by the principle that waste from one process is food for the next. And they have made over 90% drop in factory waste since 1996, which is insane. But also, they've really started to get serious in bringing into their production chain dispersed materials and really utilizing to create their carpets. And more fascinating of them, I think, is this leap and this jump where they started asking themselves, what would it mean to design our own factories to truly behave as the forests and as the ecosystems in which they're located? So how can we sequester as much carbon with our factories? How can we be storing as much groundwater, purifying the air? How can we be creating as much soil, cooling the climate in the way we are designing our own factories? Synergy, beautiful example of a social enterprise in Nairobi that is providing toilets and in the poorest neighborhoods in the city, and they are collecting human waste to turn into organic fertilizer. So an interesting example of how an organization can actually be tackled at the same time, very holistically, that social foundation, but also helping come back to planetary boundaries, so closing those biological loops. And Houdini, this is a very ambitious Swedish garment sportswear brand. All of their products are designed in ways that at the end of their lifetime, they can have a new life. So all the biological materials can go back to Earth, and all the fibers, the plastic, other materials can be reused in other processes. So really innovating in circularity of materials, but again, what is very interesting of this is not only how they're designing their products, it's very interesting how they're designing the way in which they're dealing with intellectual property. So they are being very deliberately open with their product designs. They want competitors to use their designs so that the know-how and the intellectual property can be used and therefore spread these solutions and these technologies far and wide. So we also want to bring in distributive practices in businesses. And there's also some very interesting solutions that are being very deliberate about sharing opportunity and value with all those who co-create it. From cooperatives to, for instance, businesses in India. This business in India, which is a property of the workers, is a creative handicraft business, which is owned by the workers. But also other much more bigger and mainstream businesses that are starting to change the way in which they're owned. So they're transitioning to more employee ownership, for instance, richer sounds. Airbnb, we're big fans of Airbnb actually here at Deal. It's a platform that we've been actually collaborating with. They're seeking to contribute to offer tourism accommodation in a much more sustainable way. And they're taking into account those who live in those cities. So they are establishing a model in which half of the income they collect returns to the communities they impact. And so that's really different to how other platforms similar to them behave. And they also have a maximum of 2 properties that they can list in the site. So to stop that misuse by mass owners that we've been seeing, right, over the years in other similar platforms. So these are very different strategies that contrast a lot with conventional tourism sector. And Lush, for instance, they have joined alliances to really pay fair taxes, which seems so obvious, but it isn't. And they are committed to pay the right amount of tax in the right place at the right time, whereas we know that many companies spend huge amounts of money ensuring that they pay the least amount of tax in a few places as possible, as rarely as possible. So these are the kinds of solutions that we're starting to see and that we're calling for. And we need to see more and more of this from the business world. And what we see is that the ambition, it's high. We require a big transformation in businesses if they really want to help humanity come into the donuts. And what we're seeing also is that certainly the extent to which a business can bring about these big transformations will depend, of course, on how they redesign their products, how they redesign their businesses, but they really will depend on how they deeply redesign their internal organization itself. And so what we've been throughout the years seeing is how throughout the 20th century, extractive enterprises were really dominated by one only question, which is how much financial value could we extract from this enterprise? But when we started talking with leaders and founders and CEOs of very transformative 21st century companies, what they were asking themselves was a very different question. They were asking themselves, well, how many benefits can we generate in the way we design our enterprise? Benefits for the community, for the living world, for our customers, for our suppliers, for our owners, but all, of course, in balance with each other. So what is it that leaves some businesses trapped in that extractive mentality while others are already dancing in this generative space? And here what we've done is to create a framework that really takes companies throughout 5 key design traits that can determine what businesses can be and do in the world: the purpose, the networks, the governance, the ownership, the finance. Purpose. What is the purpose of the business? Why does it even exist? How is that purpose manifesting in the operations? How is that purpose manifesting in the products, in the services? How is it networked? What relationships does the business hold? What are their customers, their suppliers, their employees, the governments that they relate to, the communities, their industry partners? And what new connections does it need to create if they want to pivot to a different mindset? And what outdated relationships must now be left behind? And how is it governed? Who is in the board? Who is making those decisions? What are the company rules and the culture? What are the metrics of success? And how are being reported? So who takes the decisions in a company? It will shape what they can ultimately do. And then we start going deeper, and it starts to get more complex, especially when you speak to business owners. So how is the business owned? Who owns the business? What are their interests and their expectations? And to what extent can owners change or undermine the intended purpose of the business in a way that doesn't really allow for transformational change? And finally, very connected, and again, also very complex, how is it financed? Where does finance come from? And what does it demand? What are the margins and the benefits expectations of this business? What are the rules on reinvestments and on profit allocation? What is it considered a fair return for investors? So we've just launched a tool that takes every business that wants to engage with Doughnut Economics through all of these questions. And we ask themselves, well, think of your business and think which of these design traits are still pushing you back to operate in an extractive way, and what would it mean to change them? But also, what are you already doing that it's allowing you to move towards a more generative space, and what else, and how can we continue to progress in this direction? So this tool is very recent. We're really learning how it's landing and how others are finding it, and how businesses are engaging with it. And it's been a slow journey for us to open this space, and we're extremely excited of having those ideas and those tools out there. And I've got a few minutes left, and I want to end this presentation. So we've gone from concepts to tools, and I'm going to move you now a bit more into the internal practices and our internal strategies at Deal. So I said we are developing tools and we're putting them out of the commons, and we constantly ask ourselves, well, how can we best help these ideas of Doughnut Economics spread at the speed and that these times demand, right? but always preserving the core integrity and the ambition of those ideas. And at the very beginning, we at Deal very intentionally came up with some strategic principles that are helping us guide our evolution as we move and as we change as an organization. And so I'm going to talk you through some of the main principles that we're following to really try to spread these tools far and wide, and some of the dilemmas that are coming up with them as well. So we go where the energy is. So Kate wrote Doughnut Economics with the ambition to change the economics curriculum at the beginning. But the truth is that there was not that much energy coming back from economic departments. So it was very obvious that the energy was coming elsewhere. City councillors, community organizations, designers, entrepreneurs. And so at that time, theoreticians didn't respond, but practitioners did. So it was really practice and action that has underpinned a lot of our strategic approach. We believe that 21st century economics will be practiced first and theorized later. And so we are focusing our energy in working with those practitioners across those fields that are showing interest. And because we're a very small team, we've always, especially at the beginning, we said, well, we will focus on working with those that are really finding these ideas useful to bring about transformative change in their place. And there are many. So we also recognize that there's so many other worldviews, right? And so many other frameworks that are offering pathways towards new economies and new ways of understanding our economy. And we're not motivated to try to persuade people to use this particular framework, but we rather respond where there is energy in a place around it. So what we're saying is that every change maker, every teacher, every local councillor, every community organizer in a place, they are in the best position to judge whether these ideas and these tools are usefully there. So it's not that we're not trying to convince anyone, but it's more that it's the change makers in the place who judge if these frameworks are valuable, and if they are, and if they reach out, then we respond to that energy and we support. And of course, as this work is evolving and is maturing, and is this a dilemma that it's very alive for us now, it's, well, of course we go with the energies, but we also must ask ourselves, who doesn't have the capacity to connect with these ideas, and how can we make sure that others are heard and that we are opening and unlocking doors so that they can actually engage also in this energy. So how can we balance going where the energy is with really nurturing energy in places where maybe it's less, they have less accessibility to it. And we've really being convinced of the power of unleashing peer-to-peer inspiration. So we believe that the most inspiring person might actually be someone just like yourself, who's already doing something that you thought it was impossible or that you hadn't imagined. And so we're seeing that teachers are inspiring other teachers, mayors are inspiring other mayors, businesses are inspiring other businesses. And we saw that from the very beginning, because when we launched the city portrait for the city of Amsterdam, so Amsterdam was the first city that publicly said they would engage with Doughnut Economics to create a new, more holistic circular strategy. And what happened was that very quickly, so many interest from around the world was triggered just by that example, right? So Copenhagen, Brussels, Barcelona, Curacao, Barbados, so many cities in that year actually reached out because they wanted to see what could they do similar to Amsterdam, right? So really highlighting and celebrating the innovations led by the Deal community and highlighting the stories of how they are putting these ideas into practice has massive big ripples. And this is the latest I think, worldview map of all the initiatives of cities and regions that are engaging since then. And I think it is really being very powerful, telling the stories of how each other are doing it. And this is a big one. We're balancing openness with integrity. So I've been saying throughout my presentation that we're really focusing on co-creating playful, accessible tools to turn these ideas into practice. And we are inviting others to innovate with them and adapt them to the different contexts. And we're delighted to see the many ways that practitioners are indeed choosing to put these ideas into practice. At the same time, we're also very careful in defining clear boundaries so that we can protect the integrity and the ambition of the concepts to ensure that they're not getting misused or watered down. So we've got, for everyone that wants to engage with Doughnut Economics in the platform, in our community, we're asking, please follow the Doughnut principles of practice. And they are derived of the 7 ways to think like a 21st century economist in Kate's book. And they just bring principles of practice, right? So what then that means in every context is, of course, different. And these are the same for everyone. Everyone that wants to engage with Doughnut Economics, please follow these principles. At the same time, we've been very careful on how we're opening this space in other specific areas where we've seen that the concept is at most risk of getting greenwashed or co-opted. And that was pretty clear in the case of business. So I was saying how it took us a bit of time to actually open this space. And that was because we kept telling ourselves, look, when a radical idea like the donut meets business as usual, one of them is going to be transformed. And we need to make sure that it's indeed business who gets transformed. So we've been very careful in this space. We just launched the tool with the framework that I briefly talked through. And together with that tool, which focuses really in that enterprise deep design, we have published as well a policy for businesses. So every business that engages with Doughnut Economics, we're asking them to follow these more specific rules. And we're being particularly mindful and careful on how, public claims can be done and the public association that businesses are allowed to make in relation to Doughnut Economics, amongst others, right? So please, that's what we say, follow the business policy. And we also have, we've been particularly careful with consultancies and how consultants and NGOs and organizations are taking the tools when they are using it to sell their advisory services. So we've been thrilled to see how many energy was coming from consultants that wanted to take this work with them. And in fact, well, without them, this work won't spread enough. But we've also been very mindful that when applied in this way, the tools are used for transformative action and not for branding or greenwashing. So we've been, last year was actually a year of exploring how to best design our relationship with consultants so that the work continues to spread very wide. And so we're exploring different models and we've landed, at least for now, what we're asking organizations to do is we ask every organization who's intending to provide consultancy services to first affirm and make a declaration that their vision, their values, and their ways of working are indeed aligned with those of Doughnut Economics. And we're asking them to complete a public declaration, and we're putting it in our platform so everyone can see how these organizations are indeed aligning and how their own internal design is aligned with that of Doughnut Economics. And it's really interesting because I think that it hasn't been a usual approach. I think that we're taking. Maybe more usual or more common would have been to take a certification scheme. But in the end, we've landed in here in this way because we really want to set a different expectation of reciprocity and of respect of the integrity with these consultants. So we're not asking for a payment, we're not asking for a specific certification, but what we're asking is to really them experimenting in a way that it's true to the concepts and to share back what they're doing so that we can all learn from each other. So we're trying to experiment with a new form of organizing and of relating, hoping to be rooting it in the spirit of trust, of peer-to-peer learning, of really understanding that we're all together in this, and therefore we want to work with those that are like us, wanting to spread these ideas with integrity. And it's just been very interesting to figuring this out because I don't think there's that many examples of how to do this well, and we really believe that we need to be creating 21st century commons of knowledge and practice. And so we need to also explore different ways to relate with those that are using these ideas, right? So this has been our starting point. I think it's just a version 1 of how we're relating with others, and we're learning a lot. It's been a year since we launched our policy for consultants and organizations, and yeah, and we're really learning along them, and hope, well, probably we'll be reiterating some of it in the next year. I'm finishing, promise. I just want to say that we are for sure understanding DEAL as part of a much bigger ecosystem. So economic transformation is big teamwork. It takes a very big ecosystem of actors, of alliances to really have traction on the scale that we need to drive this change. So we are very, very convinced that no single idea can do it all, and we must connect with each other. And so a lot of the work that we're doing at DEAL is to create tools that can be incorporated in the work of other organizations and other movements, and building really relationships of, of recognition, of respect. It's a key principle for DEAL as we've been developing. So we've left behind the starting point, the 20th century understanding of economics, and we're in a very different space. I hope now we're in a space where the goal of progress is thriving in balance, and where the economy is so much more than the markets. It's embedded in society, and it's embedded in a living world. We now know that we need to design economies that are distributive and regenerative by design, and that we can co-create tools that help us explore much more holistically the future that we want for the places we live in. And we also know that we have to look at that deep design of business if we really want them to help us come into the donuts. We need to look at the purpose, at the networks, at the governance, property, finances, because these traits will really determine whether we can pilot the future that we seek. And we're learning, we're experimenting. So we'll continue learning, and we'll continue evolving these principles to really help us think how to best put these radical ideas into practice so that they can spread wide, fast, and with integrity. Thank you very much for listening, and I really invite you to just check it out, check Doughnut Economics Action Lab and explore if you're interested. And I also invite now, just a conversation that would be great, and hear any insights and anything that might have triggered this presentation. Thank you so much.
Wow. So, oh my heavens. So first of
That was a
all,
lot.
applause. No, it was amazing, Carlota. This should be mandatory viewing for our own organization. And I hope everyone on this call will spread this seminar, because you did such a brilliant job. I always go fourth as far as questions are concerned. And so please start raising your hands, everyone, so I can, here we go. I'm not surprised. So Chris, you're first.
Hi, thank you for this wonderful presentation. And I have 2 questions, but you don't have to answer both of them. One has to do with the public ownership of corporations and the responsibility to shareholder value, and how you or the companies that Doughnut Economics Action Lab is involved with, how are they addressing that? Are they publicly owned? Maybe they're not. So that's one question. And I'm also wondering if you have academic partners, like if there are any business schools involved in this. Thanks.
Shall I answer?
Yep. Answer them one by one.
Cool. Super great question, Chris, because indeed that is actually we're learning. So we are very aware that the framework that we're putting out for businesses in Doughnut Economics really asks questions that, well, firstly are not very easy to be asking businesses. And in fact, they're having a lot of resistance. So obviously, when you start looking at ownership and when you start looking at finance, where you're literally like just going on to the question of capital and you're like really challenging the power of capital. And we've had a lot of, it's been a long journey to really think, okay, should we go that way? And I think Kate and I, and now our amazing business lead, Erin, we were always very convinced that if we wanted to put something out for business, it had to tackle those questions. But we also knew that it might not be for everyone, and it might not be. So the tool, it's open for everyone, and it's of course been there's an invitation for public companies to use it. What we're now starting to hear from changemakers and consultants that are using it is that, of course, for public listed companies is a much difficult conversation, because, you know, what is their agency really to transform and to change their deep design in terms of ownership and finance? So what we're seeing is that clearly this framework and this tool is really interesting and is having a lot of traction in startups, that they can design themselves from scratch, right? Really thinking, like helping them think how they design themselves so that they are not in the end pulled towards the same extractive model. Or private companies, family-owned companies, there's been fairly big ones actually engaging with it. So those that, of course, they have some a bit more agency in the way they're owned to change. So, but it's interesting because consultants and some other NGOs that are bringing these ideas to businesses, I'm actually surprised of how much they do want to bring this conversation to public listed companies, and I'm thrilled because so we'll learn. So there's clearly less interest in that space, and we are working with business educators. In fact, for sure, one place where it's had a lot of traction is in business schools. It's all very emergent. So it's the past few months, it's all being emerging. So there is actually now already a bit of a community group of business schools and universities that are coming together and are starting to use the tool for teaching in their courses.
I'll invite some of the people on this call, Dwight and Gavin, to speak to, if they could, because they're from the business sector, but among others. But in any case, Brian, you're next.
Thank you. What I'm wondering about is the survivability of donut, related businesses when they have to exist in a neoliberal market economy half the time. And is there ways? I mean, I'm thinking about predator-prey type of models going on. How do these businesses make up when there is such a strong consumer-based economy that we live in?
That is the question, and we are exploring this a lot, and that's probably one of the barriers that we continue to face, and that's why also, because Doughnut Economics, deal because when we thought of what do we contribute to the community in terms of transforming business, and there's so many frameworks and tools already happening, so we've put out this tool for those businesses that want to actually ask the questions from Doughnut Economics angle. But what we really think also that needs to happen is, of course, the financial system, like who's going to be speaking about investing. So policy also, so I think that our strategy with business, it's really complemented with how policy is engaging and how do they unlock the policies that we need to really allow for these businesses to thrive and to exist and to persist, but also the financial sector. And that, I must admit, and as everyone knows that you open a big box, but we are starting to actually explore collaborations with innovators in the space of finance that are really thinking how to innovate and what is the finance that we need to serve these kinds of businesses. And we're very aware that without those, of course, this cannot happen.
David, can I interject? I don't know if you intended to call on Brian Dowling or myself. I was queued next.
Yep, you're cured. Go ahead, Brian. You're welcome to go next.
Thanks. Carlota, although I've known of you as kind of your background in alternative economics, I had no idea that you had worked so closly as a co-founder for the Doughnut Economic Action Lab, and am so grateful for kind of my engagement with DEAL. It's such a tremendous, the design of it and is so practical in terms of its usage as a platform. My question is more specifically, in North America, in city work, in establishing like a Doughnut Economics city hub, kind of what I'm finding is along the lines of what the rollout of the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, working with those goals over 6-7 years time now, a fairly recent, over the last couple of years, acknowledgement that the actualization of those goals is being thwarted because of the human condition, which has appropriated development of the inner development goals, basically to help facilitate that dimension of humanity. And I actually have a strong sense of that. So my question is, how might I'm utilizing a lot of tools, a lot of resources in adopting a Doughnut economics approach to city, particularly, I think, with respect to, I'm looking at governance and polity in terms of the design, and structuring design, that there's a practical application. But what cities might I look to kind of as a template in terms of their success?
Great
Thanks.
question. Amazing. And thank you so much. I'm delighted to hear that that deal it's useful and it's been it's really serving the purpose. So in terms of cities, so if one place I think we've had traction and we're really learning from practices in cities, because that's where we began. And so actually the work in cities or in regions and from governments, it's much more, I would say, in a very different stage than, of course, business. In fact, we've even had a very different strategy. So good news is I actually haven't brought any examples of cities because I had to leave some out, but I'm very happy to actually share. Well, there's a lot of work happening from Amsterdam, Brussels, Copenhagen, Nanaimo, Thimphu, they're doing amazing things, Ipoh in Malaysia. Now, I think that I can actually share some resources, but also what we just launched, which I'm so thrilled about. So our cities lead, Leonora, just launched a new tool that is called Cities Let's Get Started. I'll now look for it and share it in the chat. But basically, it's a guide that has been co-created with all of the cities that have been working with Doughnut Economics for the past 4 years. So it's really bringing up just the practice. And so it's a guide where we're showing like 9 ways in which cities have chosen to use the Doughnut. So from just using it as a compass to redefine vision, or maybe to embed it within decision processes, or maybe as a compass to bring residents into the conversation, and so on and so on. So there's now a really amazing resource that was launched literally a couple of weeks ago, where I think you can definitely browse and look at all the different stories of how these cities are doing, because each of them are really in different also stages and different contexts, right? So I'm sure that you can find, what we've tried is to find some patterns of how these cities are doing. So I'm putting it in the chats, and I really invite you to check it out.
Yeah, thank you, Carlota.
Brian, we have a long list, Brian. So
I
let
just
me.
want to check back in with her. I'm signed in to Deal, and I just did a Google search on cities Let's Get Started, and it didn't turn up anything. So perhaps
I just shared the link.
Okay, great. Thank you. I see it. Thank you.
Great.
Leano.
Hi, really great stuff. I really appreciate a lot of the work that you're doing. I'm concerned about one of the key things that you've done is you've done a very good job of working around the capitalist problem, and it really is a big problem. But one of the key things that you didn't address, and in fact let get into your presentation, is the idea of ownership and investment, because an investment is just a loan that the borrower is not allowed to pay off without the owner's permission, which is exactly the same relationship between a master and a slave. Buy themselves out of slavery without the master's permission. Okay, so what we've done is we've transformed a direct slave society to a slave society where the owners own the businesses. They don't own the people directly, they own the means of production. That's a fundamental contradiction between everything that you're trying to do and everything that our current economic system demands. I'd like to hear you address that directly. How do you deal with, how do you talk to a business about you're not going to have shareholders anymore? You're not going to pay out these dividends anymore. How does that conversation happen? What does that look like? How does that work?
Thank you so much. That's a really very insightful comment, and it's certainly one that we are having dilemmas with. And to your question of how do we have this conversation, we're still learning how to have it, and I don't think I have it. In fact, Erin, actually, I think it would be great for those who want to go a bit deeper on, because I've done a very brief introduction or sharing the framework of business, but it would be great if there's interest, David. Erin Sahan, our business lead, he's gone really deep into this, and we have so many conversations, him and me, as to okay, well, ultimately, how do you get and how do you have this conversation? And actually, when we've been piloting this framework ourselves, especially Erin, with about maybe 200 businesses. Many of them have been privately owned. Maybe of them have been, a bit more on the, transforming, already transformational paradigm. And so, of course, the question is, okay, so how do we bring the publicly listed to actually ask themselves the questions? And I don't think it's going to be probably us directly, the Deal team. It's probably, I'm really looking for those experts and those change makers that are closely working with these kinds of businesses to navigate that question. Because what we've tried to do, and I'm not sure if it's the dilemma of whether it's working and we're always asked, like, is this, for some people, this framework is very political. For some people, it's not political at all. And so what we're trying, I think the way we'd like to explain is what we're trying to say. There's changes that need to happen that are not happening, and are not happening because of how ownership and finance is working. And this needs to change. it's a factual, it's kind of practical. It's not just, look, so many things that we could be doing and we're not doing because, your shareholders are just locking you. And that is a very difficult conversation to have. And I really don't have an answer. I mean, in fact, one of the things that we've been very prescriptive at is that everyone who wants to engage with Doughnut Economics and businesses has to go into that conversation. And of course, our tool goes much deeper. And we're hearing back from the community, well, but that's very difficult to have that conversation. And it's like, well, yeah, but we have to. So yeah, it's a constant dilemma. And I'd love to, if you're interested in this aspect, please join our community of practice, because we need more people that actually get that that's the fundamental problem.
Well, we need to, I'll take my turn now. And also I'm at a conference that I have to rejoin, so I'm going to be signing off after this. And but please go on, and Juliet will help to coordinate. But we have a working very much with the business sector also. And so I think of the collaborative zones that we might collaborate on, I think that's certainly one of them. But for my question, I've become an observer of movements. And so often they start off brave and they result in many chapters. For example, the Transition Town movement, just awesome. Hundreds and hundreds of communities around the world, so on. But they tend to plateau at a level that's much lower than is needed. And when I hope that's not what happens with Doughnut Economics. I suspect that it might be, and what it might signal. I mean, you've done so much on the basis of following the energy and spontaneous and kind of, I see it as managing the cultural evolutionary process with this, this huge variation in selection process. But I worry that it's going to, even with so much energy, it's going to plateau, and that something else is needed. Some kind of another level of organization is going to be needed. And that's a very general question to lob at you, but please respond to it. And then of course, we hope to have a much longer conversation about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question, and I definitely see and have observed similar to you. And I come also, I'm still, but I was very active in economy for the common good myself. So I worked very closely, as an activist there many years ago. I've been very close to transition networks. I mean, we're in constant relation to our peers in the movement. And I agree with you. I don't know why. I mean, there's certainly something about burnout and resourcing, and just the energy failing also, because a lot of these movements are relying on self-organizing grassroots volunteer work. There's also something, and I think that ideal, and it might change, I mean, I'm not sure, but I've particularly been, I don't know, maybe because I was part, or I've been so much into this chapter model and hubs model, we've been kind of very careful with not focusing on creating the movement of Doughnut Economics and creating a big kind of, more structured kind of movement. And we're more focusing on the ideas and on the tools in a way that anyone or many different people will use these tools in many different ways. So, and still we have the hubs figure, which is the local groups that have emerged, which actually they emerged without even us thinking of that they might emerge. And so they started so first the Amsterdam Doughnut Coalition, which triggered a lot of inspiration. And there was a big dilemma for us as to whether should these groups actually be holding the word donut, or do we want to actually make them much more fluid so that, there's least kind of, association, and therefore we can be. So I believe that maybe one way of the energy kind of keeping is by focusing on, the ideas and the core concepts to really, flow and spread, rather than this, like the name of the movement, like it's just more fluid. And I think that might help. I also think, and this is a big question for us, and David, we're going to be starting a bit of a strategic consultation for DEAL as a whole. And we want to engage with allies and people that know what we're doing. So ProSocial would be great to talk to and hear your views on some of the big questions. And one of the big questions is, how do we spread? Are we spreading, and are we spreading wide enough, fast enough? And we have this thing of small team, big impact. What else should we be doing so that this is really, as you say, at that point?
This is a grand experiment in stewarding the cultural evolutionary process. Call it whatever you like. Basically, we are trying to become wise stewards of cultural evolution, of multi-level cultural evolution, and we're all trying to figure it out in our different ways. And so I think that it's just amazing what you've done, and amazing that we're all in this together. It's truly transformative what we're attempting to do. So with that, I'm going to rejoin my conference. And so please carry on as long as you want, and as long as you're able to stay, Carlota. It doesn't have to end at 8:30. And I look forward to watching the recording of the people coming up, Bill and Randy and Suzanne and others, and Gavin. So keep it coming, folks. And so happy to have provided a forum for this. So now I'm signing off. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, David. Let's be in touch for sure. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so I lost. I don't know who got that.
I think I'm next. I'm Suzanne. Okay. Hi. Well, I am so gone on Doughnut Economics and on you and on Kate. I just tout it everywhere. My own purview is what can we do that really changes things now? And there are a lot of idealized blueprints now for the way the world should be, but they're not in action. They're just ideal pictures. And so how do we get there? And one of the wonderful things about what you're doing is that it's not just an ideal picture, but it's actually in practice. I mean, it's very unique. So I have been trying to interest the city of West Hollywood, where I am. It's an incredibly progressive city. It's always way out there in the forefront of progress. At the same time as there's tremendous conflict about economic development, and there's just a war going on about money and how the city is handling things. And so I'm trying to get them to pay attention to this, they could become one of the model cities. I can't get them to pay attention. And so my question for you is, do you have any kind of materials like, okay, I've got West Hollywood. I have reached out to some of the official, I can't get a response. Do you have any particular materials to deliver that invite an auspice, whatever it may be, to come into this situation, to pay attention to it, to investigate it, to find out about it? I do my best to say, have my say, but is there anything that you already have prepared that would help me to reach these people?
So wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your lovely words, firstly. Maybe we have a lot of material, and I think that I'm trying to think what would it be more useful, because so one thing we're planning, so we have a lot of tools that I believe are quite in depth, and that it's almost like for a later stage, right? So what you're trying to someone to just engage. I wonder whether there's something that we want to put out soon, which is a bit of the materials that we use to do a quick presentation with the notes and the videos, and all the pictures and all the, and that's not out there instantly. But what I can do is you can definitely reach out to our team, and we will actually have maybe we can have a chat, and they can just join you, and they will kind of, depending on who you want to address, we can share with you the different materials, because I'm going to put now the platform link there, but I am very aware that it's sometimes a bit overwhelming, to be honest, even for me. And we're trying to kind of design it a bit in a way that it's more, that we can give the tools a bit more like to present. But do you want to do a presentation to the council, or do you want to just share something like a brochure or something like that?
Well, I want to get their attention that says, oh, let's see what this is, you know? Just the first base, get to first base with them. I mean, once they open the door, they're going to be interested, but it's something snappy and, you know,
what you can also do, what you can also, I'll share, I'll speak to David actually, because it would be great to put together a bit of a summary, and I can send a few links to everyone based on what's been, there's a lot in the chats, and I can just disseminate. But also, I really invite you, and we're going to start doing more. We're thinking of how to do more learning spaces in the platform where we bring practitioners together, and especially people like you that are people in a community, the grassroots, someone in the community wanting to trigger that. I think that the best person you can hear from is people like you that are doing the same in Amsterdam or in Barcelona, and I think that that's still conversations that are happening a bit in the background, and we want to actually make those visible. So bear with us. I can share, what would it be helpful? Shall I share an email with a few things based on what's been asked?
We will, so after this next week, we'll send a recording to everyone that registered for this event, so we can include any links or attachments in that email if you just send them over to me.
I'll do that, because then another option, Susan, I don't know, one thing that is usually quite catchy is the Kate's TED Talk. The 20 minutes of Kate TED Talk, that's kind of something that maybe depends of who you're addressing and what do you really want to tackle, right? But also we have a couple of videos from Kate, maybe going not only on the core concepts, but just looking at what's happening in cities. So really inspiring with examples. So maybe I can share some of those videos that might be easier to take than just a big guide. Well,
I've been trying to get some people. I've done more than West Hollywood. I've done my local neighborhood association, also thinking in a smaller unit. But I share Kate Raworth's Schumacher lecture, which is absolutely brilliant.
Oh yeah.
Oh, it's so. But it's what, an hour and a half, 2 hours. You know. So how do you get their attention to even? I said, please watch this. I worked on that neighborhood association at the president. Just watch it. I can't get her to watch it, you know. So I think, is there any help I can get from you guys of how to get people's attention?
Why don't, yes, definitely. I think that you definitely seeing all the energy there and that you're already doing. I think you should definitely talk with our probably best person. It's Rob, that is our communities lead, and he's really engaging with people like you that are trying to bring the ideas from the bottom up to a council, so you can actually send, I'm going to also share the contact form. So there's a contact form in our website. Have you tried contacting us through there? Because also
no,
okay.
I've just picked up on what you're doing and trying to spread it
okay,
around,
so I'm going to share now the
help.
contact form. That's easy for me, and you'll see, you can select like a category and just share a quick message. You can select communities and arts, and you can also mention ProSocial and that you've been here, and my colleague Rob will get in touch with you, probably not immediately, but in the next 2-3 weeks we try to respond. So I'll put that right now.
And I'll jump in for David. I'm his colleague. I serve as the managing director for ProSocial World. So thank you so much. And I want to go ahead and pass it on to Gavin to get your question in as well.
Sure. Yeah. So I just wanted to just reflect that two different things. One is Liana always has fabulous concepts and I thought provoking ideas, and I thought his was great. But also Brian Dowling, his mention of the tension between this and like the shareholder model and that sort of thing. So I'm part of the conscious capitalism movement, and there's a lot of synergy obviously with these things, and really in my view, the traditional shareholder model is not optimal for shareholders. They're getting the businesses that they are shareholders of, whoever the shareholders are, that the business could be performing way better than it is, and that model is actually holding it back. And it's really just based on David Sloan Wilson's quote that selfishness beats altruism within groups, but altruistic groups will beat selfish groups. So if you can get the business operating as an altruistic entity within within itself, and also recognizing that all of the stakeholders that the business is operating within that ecosystem, and if all of them are operating altruistically, those groups will totally outperform any of the other groups that have selfish actors inside, like selfish shareholder actors, or have selfish acting selfish acting supplier whatever. So anyway, so the altruistic system will outperform the other one, and that'll be better for the shareholders too. So it's just a matter of like transforming that mindset that this thing that we've all just assumed is optimal is like, no, that's like really dumb. Just think about this. Who's gonna everybody can, there's way more pie for everybody. So anyway.
Absolutely. Totally. You should definitely, really it would be great for everyone here also to join. I think Erin is doing some webinars, and so if you want to explore a bit more how we're looking at business, because I really did a quick overview, and he'll definitely be able to engage a lot more.
Thank you. Bill?
Great, thank you. And good to see you, Carlota. I think it's...
I hadn't seen you, I just saw you.
yeah, no, I joined a little bit late. Sorry, I couldn't make it earlier. So I look forward to watching the video. I just unfortunately had another call come up. But I just wanted to check in with you. I mean, last time I saw you was before Deal started, and now Deal is very well established. And I've been in some background conversations with Erin and others at Deal, just trying to understand the strategic logic, or the logic more generally about the node company Doughnut's stance. Sort of what I think is most powerful about the Doughnut is that it took the concept of ecological and social thresholds and sort of gave them much greater exposure, if you will. It gave a visual sign to be able to do that. But I think that where the rubber hits the road is actually applying responsibility for respecting those thresholds at all sorts of subsystem levels. So national level, city level, company level. So, some of us have been applying thresholds at the company level since before the Doughnut existed. And most recently, there's been the United Nations has put out a formal mechanism, the Sustainable Development Performance Indicators, precisely for applying these sort of, you could call them Doughnut thresholds at company levels or at city levels, et cetera. So I just wanted to better understand, why there's a resistance amongst Deal to actually applying the thresholds at subsystem levels.
Great. Bill, I've heard and I've read a bit of the discussions behind, and I'm of course very close to the decision as well of company Doughnut. Although I think, I'm going to try to explain, and probably if Erin and Andrew haven't been able to explain, I'm not sure I'm going to do a better job. And I'll try.
I couldn't make sense of it from their explanation.
And I'll try, but I think, I don't think it's, so I think that what we've been seeing is that the approach to downscaling, so the Doughnut Economics approach to downscaling fair shares of global resources takes human rights and equity as a starting point. So what we've seen is that so far, all the methodologies that call for applying those thresholds to businesses are taking somehow a grandfathering approach, in the sense that ultimately, you could end up having large scale operations determining like larger amount of thresholds. And from the Doughnut perspective, that doesn't really align like conceptually and philosophically with the human rights approach that the global Doughnut brings. And yeah, now I think that it's I mean, I know there is a lot of controversial around this point, and I think we're open to discussing, and we're saying, look, if there are other if you can find ways of allocating those company donuts in a way that it's not replicating that grandfathering approach, we're very happy to explore them with whoever is exploring with them. But we've also felt, I think, Bill, that, and I think that's, of course, we can all respectfully disagree, but I think there's been what we've experienced with the Doughnut is that, a lot of people that were engaging with it in the world of business there was just such an obsession with measuring impact and allocation, and which is great, but we think there's so many other great frameworks already doing it. And we felt that there was a bit of a gap missing on the enterprise design. So perhaps we want to really turn the attention there, because we feel that this approach is much more aligned with the principles of Doughnut Economics in terms of contributing to the community of business transformation. And so I think that, at least for now, closing or not seeing that conceptual I think sense of allocating targets to companies. It's just it comes because of we just don't see it's aligned to how originally the global Doughnut comes from a human rights perspective, and I think it's I think we've believed that this was probably the biggest contribution we could do at the moment to actually trigger that conversation around ownership and finance and governance and the deep design, and perhaps others can continue doing the work with thresholds. Right now, of course, this is I know this is controversial, because I know I've read also comments and threads in LinkedIn where we say, well, the Doughnut is an idea there, so obviously you can just use it, and why are we stopping? Look, as I said, and I know you haven't seen my presentation, we are really trying to balance this openness with integrity, and we're holding this role where we're really trying to learn and to see how's best. And at the moment, we're just not convinced that the methodologies that have been developed so far for allocating thresholds to company donuts are sit in alignment with the global, like with the Doughnut economic approach. And I think it's, I probably, I'm for sure haven't convinced you that that's,
I'll just say one thing before I know that there's another question here, but I do think that part of the dynamic that's problematic here is that in many people's mind, the Doughnut is, when you say the Doughnut, that pertains to any other implementation of these thresholds. So deal saying no company donuts, unfortunately, doesn't sort of pertain to your own. And I've looked at your business enterprise level system, and it's good stuff. I'm not opposed to it. I think it's great. But when you say no company donuts, it has a kind of overarching effect that I think also is a somewhat sort of antisocial effect, or an effect where it adversely impacts other actors who are doing legitimate work that actually is human rights based. I think that it's a misunderstanding, unfortunately, of the deal team that these approaches are not fundamentally founded in human rights, and in fact in rights beyond that. So I think that there's a fruitful conversation to be had
exactly.
here.
I think we absolutely. I think we are. I haven't been engaged, because it's certainly not my the area where that's Andrew, your person, and Erinch that have been for a long time, like also going a bit deeper there. But let's definitely have the conversations. And I mean, and I do know, I think that I get your point, and the no company donut, especially that framing, it's probably problematic, and it is. I've seen it. It's becoming more and more. So we're very open. And again, all these principles, all these policies are open to change, are evolving. So yeah, let's continue. And yeah, I'm not sure where is the conversation with Erinch and with Andrew, but we can maybe have a follow-up, and we can try to again, share where we are with that. We are, because also, okay, I'm not going to open that box, but there's also a question about sectoral donuts that we're also trying to grasp with. And yeah, anyway, we can definitely continue this conversation. I think it's important to be able, though, to voice where some of us may differ. And I also think we need to, respectfully being able to, maybe at some point we have different views, and we're really, I think that if one thing we're trying is to be taking this in a very experimental and open, iterative way. So nothing, like we're open to discussion, we're open to evolution, and definitely let's continue having those conversations, because they enrich the thinking anyway, and they're needed.
Thank you. Great question and answer. Randy?
Thanks so much, Jeffrey, and thank you, Carlota. It's nice to finally meet you. I've followed the work for a very long time. I'm a close colleague of Bill's. Yeah, I wanted to reflect a little bit on some of your words. I really appreciate kind of the openness and kind of consciousness with which you describe where the organization stands in your orientation. And I genuinely see that as the intention of the organization. I do have a similar, but a little bit of a different concern. So maybe I riff a little bit off of Bill's mention of the no company donuts. So I represent an organization called the Flourishing Enterprise Institute, and our focus is on enterprise level innovation, the transformation of management practice itself through the application of systems theory in the natural and social sciences. And so our focus is very much the practical and what it looks like to empower business leaders to apply systemic practices. And so I am I guess you could call them the consultant behind the Nanaimo donut work. And so just to share a little bit in terms of experience, from our cursory review, sort of a little bit of investigating and applied research that we're doing, essentially what happens when municipalities, not even businesses, attempt to apply thresholds-based thinking, they immediately throw it away. They get down to trying to develop indicators, targets, and metrics, and most of it ends up in incremental and fundamentally conflicting with the most primary principle of the donut, which is thresholds. So when you talk about kind of like what's most central or important for the donut to do, I think beyond anything else, like it's thresholds first. If companies get thresholds conceptually and then immediately fail to apply them with any integrity, well, then the integrity of what is happening is lost. And so our experience with Nanaimo using an enterprise level solution is that the results are of a completely different world. And these are results that Deal has observed and understood. And our interest is really to learn with Deal and to expose these enterprise level innovations, not only to your community, but to the rest of the world. And the challenge becomes, thresholds-based thinking, applying the sciences and ethics to how we understand what sustainability means in the world is something that far precedes Deal. And as Bill mentioned, now Deal kind of sits the front of the movement and is recognized as the de facto owner of thresholds. And the issue now, I mean, that's my perception. Most people who think about thresholds-based thinking identify with the donut and see it as the primary source of credible information. So not to say like you own it per se, but just in terms of market position. The challenge becomes if the integrity of applying thresholds is being confined or limited by how the conversation is being managed with organizations, one, not pointing to the enterprise level innovations that do exist, that are credible, that address ethics, And on top of it, suggesting that some organizations shouldn't be doing this or providing guidance that is considered enough, just puts it puts the whole movement in a position where the potential for impact, I think, is compromised in a whole host of ways. I guess what I want to say is, as kind of a hand forward, is without getting into too much, it's been a bit of a struggle to try and really learn together, bring our worlds together, understand each other, and really explore how to evolve the movement in collaboration as multiple organizations. And I'm very hopeful, given what I've heard from you, that there is maybe a different kind of openness to engage and really explore on these concepts and some of the evidence that we're producing through our work.
Thank you for your openness, Randy. That's really appreciated. Yeah, let's continue this conversation. I think that it's an ongoing one for us. Just one thing I would like to say. I mean, I understand the impact that this can have in the, let's call, wider movement. We have been very also openly saying, look, there's other frameworks and there's other methodologies that are allocating global resources to companies. Please check them out. We're just asking, and I think that's the problem. We're just asking, do not use the donut for them. And because, as you're saying, there is this perception of the donut being, a recognized framework to do it, then by not allowing that, then it's almost like we're saying, yeah, look at these frameworks, but at the same time, these frameworks cannot use the donut, and therefore there is a problem there. Yeah, I'm very happy to, maybe we can pick them. I mean, this is a big conversation, and it probably requires for sure more of my colleagues to have it properly.
Yeah, I appreciate that very much. And I think beyond the other solutions, I think I just point to reflecting on the impact the donut is having on its own purpose and commitment, which is that thresholds-based thinking gets applied well in practice. And I think that warrants a conversation for sure. I appreciate it, and thanks for the presentation and chat.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the openness. That's really appreciated as well.
Thank you, Randy. Liam?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to comment on what Bill and Randy said, because I maybe I've misunderstood some of the back and forth, but it seems to me that the key reason that they don't want, the deal doesn't want to allow companies to do that is because companies who haven't made a commitment to actually be ethical and therefore not have shareholders, because shareholders are fundamentally unethical, are going to always use whatever system they use to extract wealth for shareholders. And that's that's fundamentally contrary to what Doughnut Economics is about. So I think that is a very valid reason for being very reticent to allow companies to use their framework with their name and therefore accomplish a greenwashing. So I think it's very, very important that we understand that it is not a question whether or not shareholders are unethical. It is a fact that that holding shares in a company the way that we do it today is an unethical practice and is not sustainable practice. And I think it's really important that they're holding a line against that. So anyway, that's the comment that I wanted to make. Sorry if I misunderstood something.
Thank you, Leonard. No, there is a lot of that, because ultimately when you are applying thresholds to these companies, I mean, our fear is also that, it's almost like, okay, just by applying these thresholds, then they're moving towards the right direction, and then it's the association with Doughnut Economics, and we're not saying they shouldn't move into that direction, and that there shouldn't be global threshold allocations. It's just that used within the Doughnut and Doughnut Economics, then we would be, as you say, a bit contradicting some of the questions and challenges that we're making companies. So let's just, let's have a conversation, because it's not an easy, it's also not an easy position for us. But I actually really appreciated that comment, Liano. We maybe haven't explained that point, which probably certainly there is profoundly or more deeply in the reasoning. And maybe it's how we're, there's definitely something about how we're communicating this and how we're explaining this that we haven't got it right, because it's not been helpful. I can see that. But I'm still not convinced that we could, that it would be sensible or in alignment with then what we're trying to channel with the deep design and challenging ownership and capital in the way we're doing it through our framework. So yeah, maybe we need to find a different way.
I think there can be good complementarity here, and I think that actually ProSocial is a great container. I think core design principle number, is it 6? I think is fast and fair conflict resolution. I think that if there's a misunderstanding here, resolving it in ways that benefit everyone, I think is a ProSocial approach. So I for one would welcome that, and I think this sets a good foundation for it.
Yeah, that's actually a nice idea. We could actually play a bit with that and use some of the ProSocial frameworks to talk a bit more about this and why, because it might help us. It might not result in actually us changing, right, but at least we are able to explain better why this challenge. And yeah, really thank you for that conversation. That's helpful. Just conscious of time now. I'm gonna have to start going in a bit.
So Brian, let's be the last question, because thank you all for this engaging question and answer session, and for both the enlightening questions but also the difficult questions, because it allows us to stretch and expand. So Brian will give you the last one, and we'll wrap it up just before the top of the hour.
Yeah, it wasn't so much a question as it was commentary on especially Bill. I haven't seen Bill in a while, but the dialogue just itself, and that context, that the openness with respect to the dialogue. Pretty much the only comment I was going to make in respect to design principles, distinctions between decentralized and distributed, for instance, that even within a ProSocial community, that's not necessarily that well defined, so it becomes a topic for discussion. So that was my point. And Carlota, thank you so much. Just a wonderful presentation.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's really been, and it's so glad that we've got the recording of it, because it's going to be shared widely. One of the things, and I won't have you answer this today, but we're going to be engaging and having conversations going forward. But one of the things that I'm wondering is the application of this framework with other frameworks, with what's emerging in Web3, which is one of those things where quantum leaps are being made, more than people know, because they're not all quite visible yet. Yeah, where some of these opportunities for major transitions in economics, in exchanging many forms of capital, are going to take place. So I'd love to, in another conversation, find out if a deal or Doughnut is being applied anywhere on the blockchain, with organizations that are experimenting with kind of digital alternatives, because that's where a lot of quantum leaps are going to take place.
So briefly, actually on that, Jeff, because we're for sure seeing the energy and the need to at least pause and really look at how can Doughnut Economics serve also on that. There's been actually a couple of publications in our website from the community about, exploring digital technologies through the lens of Doughnut Economics. And our digital platform lead actually is very eager to try to start opening a bit more conversation within the community. So it was initially when Kate and I thought of how do we cut the pie a deal? How do we, and the themes came about, the cities and business and education. Technology was one of them initially. It's still and then we said, okay, it doesn't, if any would be within business. And actually now that we're starting to explore also sectors and industries, digital technologies obviously comes up as one. So just to say that it's a great point, and that it's definitely in the radar. And I think that at some point, definitely just hosting some conversations within the community would be already interesting.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again. This has been enriching, and thank you all for hanging out, after hours here to further the conversation, and look forward to continuing it at a future time. Thank you all. Have a great weekend, and happy Mother's Day to all mothers.
Everyone, take care. Bye-bye.